So good morning, everyone. My name is Jiazheng Li. I'm a second-year PhD student at King's College London, and I'm currently on a PhD studentship funded by the AQA Education. So this is a joint project with the AQA Education. So the title of my project today is titled as Standing on the Shoulders of ChatGPT Towards the Development of an Interpretable Automated Scoring System. So student answer assessment is a critical component of the education process. Timely and informative answer assessment can enhance students' learning experience and support their academic growth. However, manually providing detailed feedback is time-consuming, and assessments conducted by different examiners can result in inconsistency in evaluation standards. So to tackle these issues, in this presentation, I'm going to introduce how can we use natural language processing techniques to develop efficient and trustworthy automated student answer assessment approach. So firstly, I'm going to start with introduce some background on natural language processing applications on student answer assessment. So in the past, the majority of the NLP research on developing automated assessment systems tend to frame this task via a text classification approach. As shown in this example here, given the student's answer as the input and train the language model to assess the answers by categorizing them into a score. This type of approach has significantly reduced the time needed for the assessment process compared with human examiners, while achieving a comparable assessment correctness. However, the lack of interpretability issue has become the big issue for this type of approach. Users for these systems cannot understand the decision-making process of the text classifiers, especially when those models making mistakes, since those models are completely black box models. So before I step into some classification results, I will firstly introduce the dataset we use. So the dataset we experiment with is an automated essay scoring AES dataset, which is one of the publicly available classification datasets that has been popularly used for design various of student answer scoring systems. It contains 10 different questions, makes 10 subsets, spans subjects like science, biology, English, and art. Questions are provided with rubric and key elements. Also, 2,300 pairs of students' answers and scores. In our experiments, we only selected 4 subsets focused particularly on the science questions because they are non-open-ended questions and without the need for any subjective judgment. So here is a lack of interpretability example we observed from the classification models trained on the AES dataset. So the orange bars are the text classifiers results trained with the students' answers only, and the green bars are the results trained not only with the student answer, but also with those critical information such as question, rubric, and key elements. So when a human examiner provided with those critical information, intuitively, their assessment on the student answer should be more accurate. However, as shown in this graph, as you can see, the performance actually dropped on the Q1, Q2, and Q4. So which means that those critical information, the question, rubric, and key elements has been treated as noise for the assessment. And based on this result, we cannot explain its decision-making process due to this lack of interpretability. So to tackle this interpretability issue, which motivated our research, we want to generate rationales that use those provided key elements and rubric to naturally explain the assessment decision-making process when predicting a score. As shown on the right-hand side, a desired explainable assessment system should be able to identify the correct and incorrect parts from the student's answer using the key answer elements and conclude a score based on the rubric. So the rationale can make the assessment process much more transparent than only predicting a score, and it can also be used as a more effective feedback to enhance students' learning experience. However, manually providing those detailed student feedback data is expensive, and a few fine-grained annotations cannot bring generalizability across different subjects. Therefore, step into the second part, we decide to make use of the recent advances on the large language models to provide faithful rationales. So I believe that many of you are familiar with the OpenAI's ChatGPT or even have tried with it. Since its release on last November, I think ChatGPT has made a remarkable influence on almost all the industries, including education. Through its conversation, people noticed its incredible capabilities, such as perform complex tasks, such as text summarization, reasoning, or general question and answering. So despite focusing on those adverse effects that could happen when abusing those large language models, such as students using them for plagiarism, I decided to use ChatGPT to benefit the education process by use its reasoning capability to generate rationales that enhance the transparency and the trustworthiness of the automated student answer assessment system's decision-making process. So as shown on the right-hand side, we find that when we offer the question, key elements, and rubric to the ChatGPT, it is able to assess the student's answer and provide the rationales that explain its decision-making process. So in the third part, I'm going to detailedly introduce our research on developing automated explainable student response assessment framework, which shorthand as ARO framework. So our framework contains 3 steps and no need for a fine-grained student feedback annotation. So in the first step, we adopt the same classification dataset I mentioned before. We provide student answers along with the question, key elements, and the rubric, plus 6 to 8 graded sample student answers to generate a prompt instruction. Those graded examples are used to let the ChatGPT be familiar with the grading format and the assessment patterns. So if you're familiar with those standard examinations, such as like GCSE, those sample student answers are typically provided from the examination standardization meetings. So once we got those well-constructed prompts, we can query the ChatGPT for a rationale that explains its assessment process. As you can see on the right-hand side, we format this rationale as like a point separated by a semicolon, then provide the rationale that explains its assessment decision. However, ChatGPT cannot guarantee the predicted score and the rationales 100% correct. So when the ChatGPT predicted the wrong score, predicted a score that differs from the human annotated score, there could be 2 possible situations. First is the human assessed score could be wrong. In this situation, we adopt a score confidence interval by asking the ChatGPT to provide 10 predictions from the same student answer and group those assessment results with the same assessed score. So, as you can see here, so when I ask the ChatGPT 10 times, the ChatGPT predicted like 90% on 0 points and 10% on 1 point. So we can see that the ChatGPT is highly confident on 0 points, but the human annotated label said 3 points in the dataset. So say if the ChatGPT is highly confident on a score that with a quite large score difference with a labeled score. In this sense, the ChatGPT is likely to be correct. So we keep the predicted incorrect label here. And here is a real example. So the student answer is obviously incomplete and been annotated as 3 points in the dataset. The ChatGPT is able to notice this mistake and confidently predict at 0 points. So in the second situation, the ChatGPT may predict the wrong score and rationale. In this situation, we additionally provide the annotated score in the prompt to give ChatGPT as a hint. As you can see, I highlight the 1 point in the original prompt there as right. So we add this 1 point, this label, in the original prompt to provide as a hint. So the ChatGPT is able to continually generate a plausible rationale to support this score. As shown in this example, the original rationale incorrectly identified the student answer matches 2 key elements. After the 1 point has been provided, the ChatGPT is able to revise its assessment and refine the generated rationale to support this 1 point. Finally, we take those ChatGPT-generated rationales from the step 1 and step 2 to train a much smaller language model, the T5 model. As shown in the slide, the input for the model is the question, key elements, and rubric with single student answer. So the demonstration examples are not needed anymore in this sense because it's a completely supervised task. Therefore, the trained model is able to take only 1 student answer and generate score and rationales like the ChatGPT did. So the distillation process can be imagined as the ChatGPT is a teacher and have some basic knowledge, and the teacher may not answer the question correctly at the first place, but it can revise its output with the help of the demonstration examples and with some hints. Thus, the queried results can be used to teach a smaller student model to execute the same task. So this is the overview of our AERO framework. Step into the evaluation results. Our experiment results shows that the distilled T5 model, which is orange bar, under our AERO framework surpasses ChatGPT's assessment result, which is green bar, on 3 questions, Q1, Q3, and Q4. And our model improves the overall QWK score by 11% compared with ChatGPT. Despite that, our model size is almost 200 gratitude smaller than the ChatGPT, and our model could efficiently perform inferences 6 times faster than ChatGPT without those huge hardware resource requirements. Since there's no annotated rationale for a classification dataset, so the evaluation of the rationale cannot be done with an automated matrix. We further performed extensive human evaluation on the generated rationale on 2 aspects. First is the correctness of the identified key elements and the application of the rubric. Second is the human preference on the generated rationale. Our results show that our model achieves better correctness on both key elements and rubric. Therefore, people are more likely to prefer the rationales generated from our AERO model. So here is an example output. We omitted the question, key elements, and rubric from the prompt instruction here, so only the student answer. So the ChatGPT incorrectly assessed this student answer as 3 points, but the AERO model is able to correctly predict 2 points and identify, as shown on this underlined part. This part of the student answer is too vague and shouldn't receive any points. So we mentioned before that the provided sample assessed student answer can help the ChatGPT for formatting and better performance. We found that the ChatGPT may actually generate rationale suffers from hallucination problem without those demonstration examples. So this hallucination stands for those generated texts that include components that are not from the given input, because the student answer assessment problem is a pure inference task. This type of the hallucination may come from those large language models knowledge base, such as those LLMs training data, which is not from the input. So you can see we summarize that there are 5 different situations in here, like incorrect scoring scale. The top of the rubric would be 3, and there's no half points. But the ChatGPT gives sometimes gives the out of 5 and 1.5 points. And there's also inconsistent assessment we observed from this data. and also uncertain score prediction. Sometimes it gives 1 to 2 points, not certain about its assessment, and some factual mistakes, such as this selective permeability has never been mentioned in the student answer, actually. And some vague rationale means like some of the rationale keeps repeats the provided key elements and rubric, but like it's meaningless for a student. So those hallucination problems indicate that the ChatGPT is not suitable to directly deploy it for automated student answer assessment task. So in conclusion, our project finds out that the ChatGPT didn't solve the automated student assessment task due to some existing problems, such as hallucination, efficiency issue, running costs, and lower performance. But we found that it can be used as a teacher model to develop more efficient and more interpretable and transparent student answer assessment systems compared with those existing classification approach. I think for the future work, we would focus on 2 parts. That first is what are the criteria to evaluate the rationale quality, because maybe in the future there's going to be huge rationales being generated automatically every day, but how to evaluate the quality of the rationale automatically would be a big question to apply those type of approach. And second would be how to improve the model generalizability, as I mentioned before. I wish my model could be able to assess those unseen questions and span those unseen subjects. So thank you for listening. Here are some references, and if you want to contact me, here's my email. Thank you.
I think we've got time maybe for 1 or 2 short questions, if anyone has something they'd like to ask now, but there will be time later on as well, if there aren't. Okay, well thank you very much indeed. So we'll save any observations, comments, questions for towards the end, okay?
Sure.
And on to our next presenter, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Omarchi, and I'm a third-year PhD student from the University of South Wales. Thank you, Lee, for that wonderful technical presentation. I'm coming from a more theoretical or philosophical perspective, so there will be less numbers and chart. The focus of my study, artificial intelligence and education, the past, present, and the future, it's to try and draw out the relationship between AI and education, and to ask teachers what they think that the impact of this innovative technology is going to be on their practice. And by doing so, as part of the data collection tool, I used Vignette, which I'll be showing us one right now. So this is a restaurant in Tokyo, diverse avatar walking networks called the Down Restaurant. It's shut down, but I think it has reopened. But the reason why this restaurant is different from similar initiative in Japan is because you can control this from wherever you are. Let's say if the staff was handicapped and is not able to come to work, maybe from some sort of disability or whatever reason, he or she can control this robot in the restaurant. Unlike other robots where they're 100% programmed to function on their own, the Dawn robot works with an avatar. It means it still relies on a human. So I asked teachers what they think, and the first impression is that this is a dystopian society, like robots taking over and doing the works of humans. But most of them agree, most of the teachers agree that as the major element of teaching and learning, it's social interaction, emotional intelligence, and also cognitive intelligence. But here we see robots interacting with people. They're serving them drinks, they're taking orders. So I know it's a different sector. We're talking about hospitality and teaching. But some of these elements can be seen here. So this is just to stimulate their thinking and to get them understand the whole reason behind AI and education. So we don't think it's an impossible scenario. So why is this an insistent topic of inquiry? Why should we talk about AI and education? There's the AI effect. We use AI without necessarily knowing that it is AI. And then there's existential risk with the use of artificial intelligence. We talk about it all the time. Anytime you go on the news, it's there. Existential risk with the use of AI. We see a lot of bodies coming up to say, okay, AI needs to be regulated. So the UK government is also doing a good job in that regard. We see the European Union also coming up with laws that will take effect from next year on how AI should be used. And then there's superintelligence, thanks to large language models and artificial general intelligence. So the growth of this sector has been astronomous, and then it's important that we look at it now, especially in the field of education. And then it's important for teachers to have this understanding. It's why this is important, because teachers also need to understand what is going on. So what then is AI? Alan Turing has his own definition. Same with McCarthy, the guy who labeled the field as artificial intelligence. But for the purpose of this study, I've decided to stick with Kaplan and his colleague. And they define artificial intelligence as any system's ability to interpret external data correctly, to learn from such data, and to use those learning to achieve specific goals and tasks through flexible adaptation. And furthermore, I have two quotes, one from McCarthy, the guy I just made reference to, who in the 50s came up with the term artificial intelligence. So in his own opinion, he says, every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. What that means is that teaching and learning can also be simulated. You can put that into programming and then get a system to do the teaching. Like we have intelligent tutoring systems, they actually do that. Bostrom, a philosopher here in the UK, says, a superintelligence is any intellect that vastly outperforms the best human brains in practically every field, including scientific creativity, general wisdom, and social skills. Now, part of the things that the teachers do tell me is that I'm a human, therefore the machine cannot be socially interactive. And then we see from this quote here that any system that can exhibit an iota of social skills can be labeled as being super intelligent. So it's a debate that's been going on, and that's why I prompt their thinking from the first slide I showed us in the beginning, that actually, yes, emotional intelligence is being developed in the AI sector. And we have systems that can actually detect emotion. They can tell if a child is crying or if he's happy or sad. They can pick out the response from individuals. So the superiority that a human boasts over machine, it's becoming less and less relevant. That might not be a right way to describe it, but the point I'm trying to make is that there's always a response from these AI innovations when it comes to the ability that we boast of as humans. So, as part of my data collection, I've used focus groups, questionnaires, semi-structured interviews to try and collect data. And thematic analysis was adopted as the method for data analysis. So these interviews lasted for at least half an hour, mostly on Microsoft Teams, with very few teachers because the response has not been so great because teachers are very busy doing other stuff. I just mentioned the challenges there, that recruiting participant has been very daunting and slow. It's like trying to hit a moving target. And I used to ask some of the teachers that, okay, what is it that you want AI to do for you that you feel is very important? And most of them would say, assessment. Let AI do the assessment so I can concentrate on teaching and learning. And that also comes with its own challenges, because I asked about the ethical concerns in terms of doing that. And then I realized that most of the teachers are also not familiar with learning analytics, which is another field of AI in education. Because when you collect data from students for the purpose of analysis, you use AI features to do that. So it's a bit of, not a catch-22, but let me just leave it as being complex situation, because if AI is doing your assessment, does that mean it's taking your jobs? And some of them will say, no, it's not, it's just helping. I just want to focus on other important issues, while artificial intelligence does the assessment for me. And then the conversation goes on and on, which we're going to see the emergent themes that is coming out of this research so far. Another challenge I've faced in the last couple of years, like I was discussing with my colleagues earlier on, is that the field of AI has experienced a lot of changes. It's very dynamic. Just like Lee said, not until November last year, there was no ChatGPT. Yes, GPT has been in existence. The research has been ongoing until OpenAI came up, they released it to people for use November last year. So that's the thing. And that's a part of the rationale for doing this research, because on the course of doing my master's, because I'm coming from an educational background, I realized that AI is one of the less talked about fields, but I cannot say that now because it is on the news all the time, and people are beginning to realize the potential. And I also realized that a lot is not being said back then about AI and education, unlike it is right now. So because the field is growing at an astronomical pace, so it keeps changing. So hopefully next year, or I hope to finish before then, I guess we'll be battling with another AI technology out there. So what are the key issues? Like I said, emergent themes so far. So with the interaction I had with the teachers so far, I realized that AI is used but not properly recognized. For instance, one of my participants was an English teacher, and he said no, he has never used an AI feature before, but he uses Duolingo. I said, well, that's AI. So that's why I made reference to AI effects initially. So AI, wherever it is being used, it's either it is poorly recognized or it's not being given the credit that it deserves. Teachers lack sufficient training to deal with artificial intelligence. and then they're overwhelmed by other responsibilities aside teaching and worry less about disruptive technologies. So the teachers would say, oh, I have to deal with the counseling issues, with assessment issues, so many issues in the classroom to deal with. So the least of my worry is maybe ChatGPT or learning analytics or any other AI technology that is out there. And then there's also this debate on critical thinking. Some of the teachers are of the opinion that AI disrupts critical thinking. It says it does not support critical thinking because if ChatGPT, for instance, does your homework, where is the critical thinking? On the other hand, some teachers said it enhances critical thinking because now the student has to think of a way to use this technology because he was not taught in school, which was quite interesting because I thought most of them would be critical to say, no, it does not enhance critical thinking, but it was 50-50. Some were of the opinion that it does enhance, while others said it didn't enhance critical thinking. So where am I so far? Well, I still need to take more interviews because I've had less than 10 participants so far. And of course, more interviews means more data analysis. And I'm going to leave us with a question I always ask the teachers, which is part of the vignette I use as part of my data collection. Could AI-driven learning systems replace a human teacher? So I'm asking us that question now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And there's a provocative question for us, and the hand's gone straight up. Yes?
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the ethics, as you spoke about that quite a lot in the abstract. So what do you think the main ethical issues are in relation to teacher professionalism and AI?
Oh, thank you. There's the bias, because, you know, as part of the literature, people say the bias is not, well, scholars say the bias is not with the system, but with the program. So it's more like saying the technology is neutral. So if there's a bias in the system, then it comes from the programmer. So part of the ethical challenges when it comes to using AI in teaching and learning is misinformation, the ethical morality when it comes to using AI for teaching and learning. And then there's misclassification of pattern. I'm sure Lee also mentioned that in his research. And the good thing with AI and learning and education is that the challenges are similar regardless of the field. So the major issue there is the ethics of using AI. And I also made mention of learning analytics. If we're taking data from students, are they aware? And then who is making this decision? So that is another ethical issue to deal with. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Right.
There was a hand here, lady here. So we might have to wait till the end, and then if you keep your questions in mind, we can have a more general discussion towards the end. Okay. Oh, you want to build straight on? Or I'm going to come to you second. Then yes, go ahead. Yeah.
What I wanted to add, or maybe to just maybe go on the side of, is the idea of ethical issues, because we seem to take ethical issues as fixed, but ethical issues pre-AI, when people thought of ethical issues then, AI did not exist, so they did not take into consideration AI. So probably the first question is, what do ethics look like now, or what should they look like now in the world of AI? Because when they were formulated, the ethics we are talking about, there was no AI. So is ethics out of context? Thank you.
true, because, I mean, sorry?
Right, carry on.
Okay, I mean, where there's no law, there's no transgression. So if the ethics are not out there, like you said, and rightly so, I mean, before now, no one said anything about ethics, right? And I mean, let me take us back to learning analytics. It's not new. We've always taken data from students. That's how we do assessment in schools, right? But now, because AI is part of the stuff doing assessment, we're not calling for ethics. And then, you see, out there, when you look on the internet or scholarships out there, you see that ethicists are campaigning against AI, and it seems the advantages that AI offers is now being overshadowed because of the position that the ethicists out there are placing themselves, because they're making it look bad. Like I said, technology is neutral. So if we are looking at the ethics in using artificial intelligence, yes, we should set out the rules. And thankfully, like the Russell Group, for instance, have drafted their rules. Some universities have banned AI in their institutions, like ChatGPT, for instance, is banned in some institutions. But the rules have been set, so we know that if a student does this and breaches the university system, then yeah, foul play has occurred. You know, there's no honesty, there's no transparency. But before now, anything can go. But now we have the rules.
Yeah, thank you. And just finally, your question. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask about your onto-epistemological stance in your research, and have you considered technological posthumanism, perhaps, that carries the implication that technology does not decenter the human teacher or learner, that it sort of like embodies itself and it entangles itself with the human, so non-human and human agents, they come together to create a new way of being and learning? Thank you. Sorry, slightly packed question there.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat?
So your ontology and epistemology in your research, so what is your stance in that as a researcher?
Okay, yeah, just to answer the first one on redefined concept, it's part of it's part of what my research is seeking. Like, should we redefine social interaction? Because the theme that has emerged so far, that is still emerging, is that social interaction is the key element when it comes to teaching and learning. And then with the rise of these technologies, it seems we will have to redefine social interaction. And regarding philosophical viewpoint, I'm coming from, well, I'm using what's it called? Foucault. Sorry if I'm a tongue twister there. Foucault. So the panoptical system of learning, whereby it's like the all-seeing eye. So I try to imagine that learners are also being watched. Let me just take us to Shoshana Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism, you know, where this is outside of education now, where she talks about how social media is controlling people, how data is being mined from people, and then they kind of decide our daily life. And then borrowing that into education, where are we going with learning analytics? Why do we need so much learners from students? So I'm looking at it from those two philosophical lenses, from Shoshana's work and Foucault's work on panopticon experimenting. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So as I say, we'll hopefully have time after the final speaker for more discussion and questions.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, good morning. My name is Patrick Alexander from Oxford Brookes University. So I'm here today to talk to you about virtual ecologies of learning. And I was thinking probably this morning to mirror another session this morning. I could have retitled this "Do Children Grow on Electric Trees?" or something like that. So yeah, young people redreaming education in the metaverse. And I should probably start by saying I slightly overpromised in the abstract, the perils of portention. So this will be dealing mainly with the kind of conceptual questions of the project rather than the empirical part. So very briefly, I'll go through sort of 4 steps today. Start with a bit of an overview of the project and some starting points and some kind of theoretical provocations against school as the starting point for the project. Then I want to kind of touch on the sort of supposed educational possibilities of the metaverse, but also touch on what I think might be some kind of enduring problems with how it's framed at the moment. And then I want to share a few examples of potential critical practice in the metaverse. You can decide whether or not how critical you think they are, and then just give you a sense of what the next steps are for the project. Can I just, by a show of hands at this point, get a sense of, does anyone think they know what the metaverse is? Yes, a couple of people, good. You come and tell me afterwards. And I want to say at this point, thank you to the British Journal of Education and Technology for awarding the fellowship that funded this project, and also thanks to Cleo Hopkin-King, who is the research project associate who's helped with this work. So technology really isn't my field, and the metaverse certainly isn't. My main focus is on the anthropology of education, and I've done a lot of research on the anthropology of schooling, particularly with a focus on how young people are socialized into concepts of futurity. So how is it that a kind of modernist concept of the future pervades in education, and what is the kind of lived experience of being socialized into that concept? During the pandemic, that kind of led me to think about, with those questions in mind, what might the future of mass education look like if we try to imagine it beyond the traditional parameters of schooling? And doing that kind of took me down a path to think back to the classics of critical pedagogy and the deschooling agenda of the 70s. To try and return to those ideas and see how they might be useful to us. In fact, to go back to the beginning of the 20th century and explore other ideas on getting rid of schools. But then also to kind of recognize that there has been a kind of mainstreaming of this, potentially radical proposition in other areas of education. So the recent UNESCO Futures of Education report, I think, suggests some possible ways of kind of engaging with that deschooling agenda in a more kind of mainstream way. And alongside that, at least in 2021, there was a kind of mainstreaming of metaverse platforms as a potential context for this happening. Could this be where we move mass education beyond schooling? And specifically, obviously, ideas about the metaverse have existed for a while, but they sort of jogged into the mainstream in October 2021 when Facebook became Meta and then sort of launched or purported to launch their own metaverse. And it's, as the other speakers today have kind of inferred, it is interesting to be working in this field where you think it was only October 2021, not very long ago, that this became sort of briefly became something that people were interested in. And then, of course, since November of last year, things have slightly changed, and maybe the metaverse is slightly overshadowed in the process. So with all of those things in mind, going back to some kind of earlier thoughts about what the future of education might look like, and I was sort of drawn to Fernando Ferrer and thinking about the modern school as it emerged in Barcelona back at the beginning of the 20th century, some sort of social anarchist ideas about what education could look like if it wasn't the idea of school that we're used to, and so I was trying to keep that brief moment of kind of educational experimentation in mind as I was going ahead. So with all of that in mind, this project is quite a sort of straightforward design of doing some conceptual mapping and kind of mining exploration of the metaverse as it exists or doesn't at the moment, which is where we are now, which will be followed by 2 consultation workshops with young people in 2 different international contexts, and then the building the building of those young people of a metaverse space where they can then experiment and do whatever they like, and then to kind of find out ethnographically what happens in that process. So yeah, the project has been slightly slower than anticipated. As you can imagine, getting ethical clearance to let kids run wild on the internet is not always the most straightforward thing. So on to the kind of theoretical provocation. I think that the starting point for trying to think about what a virtual ecology of learning might look like was an article from Stephen Ball and Jordi Collet-Sabé, who I think is presenting next somewhere in the conference, that presents quite a sort of striking, but I think quite a kind of provocative critique of schooling. So drawing heavily on Foucault, that they suggest that schooling is ultimately a kind of intolerable institution, that we should give up on that process of attempting to redeem schooling, and really we should try and get beyond it for these different reasons, and I won't go through them in too much detail, but the kind of the self-evident quality of schooling as a context for learning, that it's unproblematically positive and progressive, that it will cure all ills, that there is a kind of a binary discourse that's promulgated through schooling, and not least through the concept of schooling itself, that education is either school or not school, that it produces ethnocentric discourse on the universality of human experience, and I think our keynote yesterday, if I crudely paraphrase, suggests that schooling is only second to genocide in its kind of deleterious effects on indigenous communities. So there are some strong arguments that the history of schooling is not all that rosy. And the rest. So the discourses of individualism, all the things that we know and have critiqued about schooling for a while. So my question was, thinking about all of this and broadly agreeing with that position, that there is a lot about schooling which is intolerable as it stands. The questions are, sort of what could learning in the metaverse be, or what could education be in the metaverse if not schooling? The follow-up article from Ball and Collet-Sabé talks about trying to go beyond schooling, using ideas of the commons. Could we think about a kind of common educational space, or the commons as a place where education could be different and offer new horizons of freedom? And what are the benefits of a kind of ecological framing of learning in this context? So using ideas from someone like Gilles Deleuze, or really ideas from Gregory Bateson, given that he stole them from him, or just trying to think about how we imagine that landscape in a different way, to try and move things forward. So that takes us into the metaverse, and given that I've got a slightly more time, I'll tell a small anecdote at this point, because I was thinking, okay, I need to figure out this world, and I was walking my dog, and I bumped into a woman, and boring her with ideas about this project, and she said, "Oh, I work for Meta." I said, that's a nice middle-class coincidence. And so she sort of offered me some of the hardware to get into a kind of quote-unquote metaverse space. And so that's how I started to kind of enjoy the experience of being in metaverse worlds, and not being from that kind of a background. It was all new and really exciting to me. But then I started to get a bit confused about my experience, and I'll go on to that now. So for those people in the room who didn't put their hand up before, this is a kind of a crude summary of what you might describe as the metaverse. There isn't a huge amount in the kind of literature, I guess, at the moment about education in the metaverse. But when people do write about the metaverse, they almost always start with Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which was a sci-fi novel from the early 90s that uses the term arguably for the first time, and is used as a kind of historical punctuation point, if you like. But obviously, virtual reality technologies have been around for a long time, and so I guess the question is, well, what is different about the metaverse that isn't virtual reality? And one way to explain it, I guess, would be to say it's about Web3, which I think will probably already sound like a really anachronist thing to describe it as quite soon, or the internet in 3D. These kinds of qualities, that it's a shared online experience that is persistent. It's there even if you're not. It's decentralized, and it gives you a sense of presence, of being with people that you don't get from other kinds of kind of digital interaction. Often framed in these different ways as virtual or augmented or extended reality. But one idea that I'm working through at the moment is that's normally the distinction is that the metaverse is about one of these versions of reality, and then there is another reality to which we defer. And I won't sort of bore you with my GCSE philosophy on this one, but clearly there has been a lot of literature around for a long time about the questioning the realness of our reality, the extent to which it's already always mediated. People like Baudrillard and Guy Debord. So that's a kind of interesting one. So, could we think about the nature of the reality in the metaverse as not being this distinction between virtual and not virtual, but maybe about velocity, maybe about, the fastness or the slowness of the reality that you experience in these kinds of worlds. I think if you didn't put your hand up before and you weren't born after 2005, then that's probably totally acceptable, because the demographic of the metaverse is extremely young, which is another interesting thing that I don't think it's really in the news as much as it was, and you could be forgiven for thinking that people aren't using it, but I think in that demographic, some people would suggest that there are tens of millions of people using sort of quote unquote metaverse platforms all the time. So while a true metaverse doesn't really exist yet, the idea of a kind of completely connected, sort of equivalent, mirror equivalent of the so-called real world, there are lots of these different platforms that have lots of metaverse qualities. So things like Minecraft or Roblox, or other things that have been around for a long time, alongside sort of quite complex sort of multiplayer games, Fortnite and things like that have also been around for a long time. So that's the kind of the landscape, if you like. And here are some projections about sort of what where we might go in terms of the scope of the business picture for the metaverse in the future, or obviously prospective. So what does it look like? What is the experience of education in the metaverse? I think, like I say, there are some at this stage in the project there are some sort of clear and extensive prospects for what the metaverse might do for education, and they're all the things that you could easily imagine. So things like modeling, simulation. Whenever you see a company advertising how great the metaverse will be for education, they normally talk about going into space. The idea you could be in your classroom and the children can travel through space, or going back in time. The idea that you can travel to a different time and experience what it's like to be in a Roman fort, whatever it is, or about space in the present. So the typical one would be you can go and have coffee at Machu Picchu. So there is an interesting kind of velocity of reality happening there as well. That you can kind of zoom around the world, and all of these other things potentially that also attend to SG4. The ideas about inclusivity, global citizenship, all of those kinds of things. So all of that sounds great. But the interesting thing that I found so far, and this was what kind of confused me, was that in lots of the formal contexts for education that I've encountered in the metaverse, there is a strong tendency to do one of two things. One, you think you're a metaverse developer. You think, what can we do with education? We can do anything. We can literally create anything in the world. What should we create? And the answer, more often than not, is a Victorian school, which is an interesting one, right? Why, if you could do anything, would you recreate a model of schooling that has been around since the 1880s? And so more often than not, this is the place that you end up. You end up in a kind of strange, empty, haunted American high school classroom, or or the British equivalent. And you can go online and find countless news stories where people say, we've recreated our school in the metaverse. And you think, why would you do that? And the same is true for universities. So if you go to somewhere like Engage, this platform in the middle, it's these kind of cool floating islands, and you can go in there and walk around, but it's empty. There is nobody there. And there are lots of kind of, watch this space messages from places like the Bodleian Library, and you can walk in there and you can walk around, and it's exactly like the Bodleian Library, but you can't touch the books. So there is this kind of strange thing happening at the moment, where our existing ideas about education are being ported into this space. And I think there are some ways to kind of theorize what's happening there. So yeah, on the surface, there is this kind of regular conflation of schooling with education. And those traditional forms of learning are essentialized. So for example, if you, after this, I'm happy to share the slides, if you click on the top link there, you go to an advert from Meta about learning in the metaverse, and it's a grandmother and a granddaughter, and they're floating through Saturn, and they're picking up bits of ice from the ring around Saturn, and at the very end of it's amazing visual experience, the grandma says, so now you'll be able to write that paper. And you think, what? So at the end of all this, you're going to go and sit down and write a paper about Saturn? So there is this kind of essentialization of things that have already come, and you could think about that as the kind of reproduction of educated subjects through forms of governmentality, the idea that this is all very good for us and that we should go back to the modern school. The modern school will continue and persist in the metaverse. And so there's also the promise of the metaverse is often presented as this kind of hyper-individualization that with combined with generative AI, we were talking about this before, that you could kind of script and personalize your educational experience so that the things you need to learn will be presented to you before you even know that you need to learn them, and so you will forever be on the correct path towards what you need to learn. And of course there is a kind of disciplinary component to that, or a kind of component of surveillance. So where is the education in all of that schooling? And then there is this kind of interesting thing, if we do try and conceptualize the reality of the metaverse in terms of velocity, about a kind of educationally rapacious reality, that the promise of the metaverse is that we will always learn more faster. That and for those of you old enough to have seen The Matrix when it first came out, this kind of moment that you will suddenly stand there and then go, I know Kung Fu. And it just happens to you like this, and you won't have to worry about the actual sort of educative process anymore. So those, I think, are some of the enduring problems that kind of, in spite of all of this potential, so far as I've been sort of floating around in this space, these formal education spaces do remain largely unimaginative and kind of haunted. So meanwhile, youth-led content doesn't really engage with in my experience so far in that kind of sort of formal educative approach. It's kind of otherwise quite active, vibrant, playful, irreverent, acephalous. There is no kind of hierarchy, very unregulated, so you can kind of end up in a strange room with some kids trying to play a game and they're trash talking you, that kind of stuff. And you could associate that with, as we heard in the initial discussion yesterday, with kind of soft skill competencies, probably, teamwork, that kind of stuff. But that's not happened. No children that I've encountered, young people, are talking about anything like that. Of course, there are lots of safeguarding and risk questions here, and where educational content does exist formally in something like Roblox, the interesting thing is that young people do exactly what Meta does and reproduce the modern school, because that's what they know. So that's not particularly surprising. But they focus on things like, how do you get away from your maths teacher, or the kind of social aspects of schooling. So the same things, but slightly differently framed. So that leads me finally on to some examples that again, I can share the slides and you can have a look at. I'm not sure they exactly attend to the thing that I'm looking for quite yet, because these aren't entirely youth-led sort of examples of critical engagement or of praxis or anything like that, but they are interesting alternative educative uses of spaces that are metaverse or kind of metaverse adjacent, I guess. So the first one is an initiative for Indigenous Futures, a kind of game that engages with Indigenous knowledge and is constructed by students with their teacher. So that's quite an interesting example of trying to use a metaverse space in a way that's educational, but is a long way away from the modern school. Maybe slightly less exciting, but still very interesting. Young people redesigning Croydon city centre in Minecraft. So another example of something that's highly educational, but kind of moves away from a traditional schooling setting. And then last but not least, and I think most interestingly, this example of Biskabiyang, which is Anishinaabe or Ojibwa language learning game that was designed by a teacher with her students, where you effectively kind of wander through a forest. And so it is a kind of literally a virtual ecology, and the ecology is presented as the context for learning. I guess sort of more or less in keeping with an indigenous worldview. So that's a very different kind of space that could show something of the promise of what these metaverse spaces can do. Having said that, it's still very gamified. It's still very cinematic. It has lots of kind of complexities to it as well. So yeah, there we are. Next steps is to continue this, to get young people involved and to carry on with the ethnography. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions about that presentation? And after that, we can move back to our other presentations as well.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. Thank you for that.
Oh, just sorry, could we just get you the mic? Thanks.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. Thank you so much for that. I suppose one of the things that sprung into my mind as you were speaking about the metaverse is, we're only bound by our imagination. And I suppose one of the things that I find it perhaps a little bit concerning is will it become dominated by those who have the knowledge to actually develop it? So are we going to be reproducing the same inequalities and really recreating the same kind of societies in the metaverse that we're trying to avoid?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's kind of like the internet in the mid to late 90s, that there is that moment where clearly there are sort of major commercial interests that are trying to corner the market for so I think in the case of Meta, what they really want to do is to be the people who make the avatars. So they kind of birth you into the metaverse, and then you go around, and so your avatar will always be Meta no matter where you are. So absolutely, those are the big challenges. I mean, we were talking before about the potential overlap or the inevitable crossover between generative AI and the metaverse, and so potentially that makes it a lot easier and a lot faster to construct the worlds that you exist in. And there are lots of kind of youth, child-oriented development tools out there, Blender and things like that make it easy for people, or relatively easy for people to build these worlds. But you're absolutely right. The money will always be with the big commercial interests. Yeah.
Yes, question here. Thanks.
Thank you for that fascinating presentation. I will share something. It's not personal to me, but it's someone I know who is challenged with, has been diagnosed with psychosis. Now, this presentation is just triggered in me, probably, that maybe there is a need for interdisciplinarity. I would be interested in knowing what psychiatrists would say about the metaverse. Is it an alternative reality? Is it an extension of our existence, or its distortion? I'm worried about that because I know someone who is living in another world other than what we are living in and is getting help from psychiatrists. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I guess that one of the kind of aspects of that ecological model would be to kind of explore the schizophrenic qualities of the system that we live in. So, for example, the idea that on one hand, Meta is saying to everybody, come into the metaverse because you can do whatever you want, and here's a school where you can do it. There is a schism there. There's a kind of tension or a double bind between the ideas that people are being presented with. So if anything, I think the potential psychological harm that comes with entering into this world is the one that already exists in the world that we inhabit. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lady there.
Thank you for the fabulous presentation. And as you mentioned, why we want to build a traditional school in a new world. So what do you think with the artificial intelligence, what will be the disruptive new education system look like in metaverse in this new world? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm hoping to find out when I sort of carry out this work with these young people. I mean, the one idea that we're playing with at the moment is to think, okay, well, what is a kind of known ecological space where there is a kind of sense of commons, something like a beach, where even in kind of legal terms, you're in space that isn't kind of in some countries isn't owned by the state or isn't controlled by the state. So can we port some of those ideas about the commons into a metaverse space and start from that design principle to say, okay, well, yeah, we definitely don't want a school with all of the architecture that it brings. So what other kinds of contexts could you imagine? And I don't pretend to think that I'm the most imaginative person for that task, but I'm hoping that when I do it with these young people, they'll come up with something interesting. Having said that, I've done lots of workshops with young people where I say, okay, let's imagine education beyond the school. And it's extremely difficult for them to do it because they've been deeply socialized into imagining that the most radical thing you can do with education is more GCSEs or longer lunch breaks. So, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Very interesting. Kind of following from this discussion about schools, I was interested in what you said at the beginning about the critique of schooling and so on, and how you juxtaposed it with this work. And one example you kind of glossed over was of students who introduced some different schooling aspects. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on that, or if you have more of this, and maybe going forward, if students who do take part in online schools in VR, some of these are emerging, might be able to kind of imagine how some of these might be addressing the politics of traditional pedagogies. It's just an idea. But maybe you're seeing something already.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is exactly that question of practically what would the significance of this be? How might it have some kind of impact on traditional forms of schooling? And again, to the keynote yesterday, I don't imagine that it's a kind of radical shift and suddenly people say, yeah, let's shut all the schools and do something different. I'm sure it's in a kind of incremental change where hopefully and slowly the nature of the interactions that we see in mass education, not in schooling, move away from what we've seen so far. But I think it's the totality of that discourse about schooling is so powerful that it's extremely difficult to get away from it. As we saw with someone like Ferrer trying to do that at the beginning of the 20th century, it didn't end well for him, and the school wasn't open for long. Or in the pandemic, where you had schools getting their students to wear their uniforms at home. I mean, like the school just in a tentacular way came into everyone's houses, so I think it's a very challenging sort of concept to break away from.
Thanks. Very, very interesting presentation. And my question, just following up the previous discussions on the critiques of schooling. So I'm wondering whether it has to be about school. Probably, I'm not sure whether was your concern about the schooling itself or education in general, because I think in reality, when you're asking the children about your imagination about the school, they have something thinkable and unthinkable. I think that's true for the metaverse. So if you ask them to imagine a school, it has to be, school. But I'm wondering what you really want to inquiry for your project, for education or anything. And another question is, I'm really curious about your next step, about the metaverse experiments and the ethnography. So I really want to know what's your plan for this ethnography. It would be really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And maybe there's an answer to both questions at the same time. I mean, you're right. I'm very interested in not looking at schooling or trying to look beyond schooling. And the real challenge is that the conversation always takes you back there, because that's what I think at least in the examples of the metaverse that I've seen, is that people who work in tech maybe conflate schooling with education, and so that is where you end up, or you end up in a history lesson in Machu Picchu, but it's still a history lesson. So I think that's the real challenge, is that discourse is extremely deeply sort of embedded in people's conversations about education. The second one is that I don't know. I really hope that, so the idea is basically to build a closed sort of virtual space where kids can interact, and then to basically say everything else is up to you, and away you go. And of course, that raises all kinds of complexities. And it could be that something really exciting, happens. It could be that they do something that is quite predictable, or it could be that they don't do much at all. And I think any of those would be kind of interesting outcomes, because hopefully they would tell us something about what this, what those kinds of spaces offer for education. So so I don't have a horse in the race, as it were, when it comes to the metaverse. Yeah.
Yes, there's a gentleman over there. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for a fascinating talk. I'm interested in, it's more a comment than a question, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. But interactions, pedagogical interactions, and the material. And in this metaverse, this sort of interactions between learners and the material when the material's not real. And when you mentioned about Minecraft, it's really getting me thinking about, my 9-year-old, he plays Minecraft a lot, and also, uses the sort of Lego Minecraft. He's interacting both in that metaverse and comparing that with the game as it unfolds in the so-called real world. So I just lots to think about, really.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've been thinking about this a lot, not being sort of well versed in the kind of practicalities of how you you create some kind of palimpsest between realities or something like that. Again, going back to that kind of fast, slow reality. I mean, is this a slow reality? Depends how much you're enjoying the talk, I guess. And there are fast versions of it as well. And you think about the argument if people were saying, oh, well, it's only in these virtual spaces that we experience augmented reality. But if you're a regular user of Instagram and you go on a walk in the forest and you leave your phone at home, that doesn't mean that you stop thinking about what's Instagrammable. So there is a kind of, there is an encroachment of that technology into everyday life all the time. So I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, how do those things continue to intermesh? And of course, it's about the technology changing and wearable technology and all of that stuff as well. Yeah.
And I just want to make sure, if our other two presenters want to join us, if there are any questions, particularly about those presentations, for example. Yes, gentleman here, and then another one there. Okay, and one over there. Right, thanks.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask all three of you, and it's been very interesting, the range this morning. If you take, say, a hospital and look at that, it's changed dramatically over the last 200 years, hasn't it? And the way in which we approach medicine. And your picture you put up of schools might suggest that schools haven't changed very much in 200 years. I think actually, being a bit defensive, being an ex-teacher, I think they have. But I just wanted to ask you, all three of you, how do you think within the institutions of that, how this can be used, AI and technology that you're talking about, in a realistic but also positive way, taking in mind, how young people can benefit from this moving forward, and how we can challenge and nudge education and schools to adapt.
I think Also as an ex-teacher, I would say respectfully, I kind of disagree about the about the point on hospitals and schoolings. That I think actually most hospitals are literally the same buildings that the hospitals of the 19th century were in, and of course medicine has changed, and of course pedagogy has changed. But I think a lot of the kind of principles of schooling are relatively unchanged from the 19th century. We still have that kind of Fordist model dominating, in as much as you might have child-centered pedagogy and everything else. The bottom line is still assessment against the norm, which suggests the inevitability of deviance and all that kind of stuff. So I think the real challenge is to I suppose to imagine, to try and imagine beyond that horizon, to say, well, yeah, we're not going to get rid of schools, so how can we incorporate other things into the existing process of schooling such that it ceases to be schooling? Would be my take on it, but that's no small challenge.
Yeah, I agree. The school will always be there. The educational system will always be there, but there will be changes like we're experiencing right now. I think the major theme is that the current system should raise learners who are independent and independent using these technologies to achieve their learning objectives. Making reference to 19th century and how education was back then, it looked more like learners have to be fed. It was like they were on an assembly line system kind of learning, like rote learning, have to do this, do that. So it kind of discouraged innovation and creativity. But with what is happening right now, we can see that technology is making a difference.
Well, I think from the perspective of my research, which is focusing on those automated assessment, I think that could be different in the era of, like, say, those large language model. So it gives like an opportunity to free these teachers on correcting those assessment. So the teacher could focus on teaching, and the assessment could be done much more faster and much more fair because it's not conducted by people. So the system, if the model made some mistake, it can happen to everybody. So it's a fair system, and it's going to be for sure much more faster than before.
Hi everyone, thanks for some really interesting presentations, really appreciate it. I have a question, and any one of you or all three can answer, I don't really mind, but I want to return to something that Michael said earlier. Michael, you said that technology is neutral, and I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. I think technology has agency. I think different kinds of technology bear certain affordances, and oftentimes those affordances depend on the journey that technology has undergone. So how does technology reach us? Usually it's because a big tech company has certain investments, and they produce us something that we can then use. So my concern is similar to what the lady asked previously, is, how do we use technology in a way that doesn't basically just reproduce certain inequalities, whereby we are just kind of being, for lack of a better word, manipulated in a capitalist society for the benefit of other people. So how do we kind of fight against that with the emergence of these new things, perhaps with the assumption that technology isn't neutral? Thank you.
Good question. Well, I would like to believe that technology is meant to be neutral, but there's someone behind it. So that's why I said it comes with its own bias. Not because the technology itself is biased, but it was built in the system by the maker. And sorry, what was it again? There was something you asked that I wanted to pick on. Yeah, explainable AI. That was the point I was going to make. It's part of what the proponent of AI or technology are saying now. That AI should be explainable, like we should know what happened in the black box. Because as it is now, I think ChatGPT is open license, right? For now. So, but there are other technological innovations out there that are not. So we need to know how they arrive at that decision so we can take out the inequality, the bias, and all the negative things we do talk about. So I think explainable AI will be the answer to that. Thank you.
Is it the lady here? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My question is for Michael. I'm going back to what you were saying about critical thinking skills and how you were surprised, and I was a bit surprised that half of the teachers thought that AI is developing critical thinking skills. But when you think about it, did they differentiate between different types of critical thinking skills, like lower level and higher level thinking skills? Because it's hard to say how it helps maybe development of comprehension, but easier to see how it might develop analysis or synthesis or even evaluation. Did teachers differentiate between different thinking skills when they were talking about it? Just curious.
No, they didn't. But now that you mention it, and from the context which they were coming from, that will be a lower critical thinking skill.
Thank you.
So, some really excellent questions and so on. We've still got just a couple of minutes if there's any final thoughts. Yes, over here. Thank you very much. And then I'll hand over to you so you can give us some information about another initiative that you might all be interested in.
If I may I pick up on the sort of convenience of AI as regards assessment? It just strikes me that, you know, exploring about the influence of assessment on us as educators that could be important here. That in assessing, it's not just something that's going to be for the learner and you know, finding the most rapid way and convenient way of getting them information. I think is also, you know, our own interaction with the learner and the materiality of the assessment process itself. I think that can change us as educators. So I wouldn't want to sort of throw out that baby with the bathwater in moving through to AI. I'd just be interested in, you know, any thoughts about that.
So yeah, that's basically why that I'm focusing on making those explainable assessment systems, because it used to be when those teachers correcting those assessment students' examinations, they typically give just a mark and without explanation. That's not helpful for those students to gain to learn why they didn't make it correct in most of the case. So that's why that I'm focusing on not only providing the assessment score, but also provide effective feedback according to these key elements, which parts that you should answer it correctly and which part you didn't answer it correctly. And as I also talked about, it's our research currently focusing on those non-open-ended questions. But in the future, it is worth to explore those applications in a broader view, because we got those large language models, so we're focusing on those maybe judgments with subjective opinions.
Thank you. Do you want to say?
Hi, I'm Alison Fox, one of the editors of the BERA blog, and we've just launched a special series of blog posts, which we've collected some from the archive, and we're inviting you to add to, presenters and all of those of you who've been making these really thoughtful questions. So it's the AI in Educational Research and Practice special series, so specific to several of the sessions in the conference. So we'd really invite you to think about submitting a 750-word piece. I'll leave some of the cards here as to how to do that. But it allows you a space to not necessarily present a piece of research, but to carry on the conversation with some of these questions and these debates, using sources of evidence that can be broader perhaps than an academic paper. Could be something that you've been working on as well as part of that mix, but you can link it to the media and public sources and websites and things. It would be really good if you could have a look at the sources that we've already been having, and we were sort of thinking, are any of them out of date? but actually some of them are starting the conversation, so it'd be really good. I'll leave some of these cards here. If you want to come and talk to us, we've got several sessions, meet and greets over in the main centre this is the main centre, but our main home for the BERA registration and everything. So I look forward to speaking to anybody interested in that, and I'll leave these here.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think really now we're nearly out of time, so I just want to say thank you to all of you for that incredibly interesting conversation. Thank you, of course, to our presenters who've really stimulated some new thinking here. And a final round of applause for us all.